based on the 10 that we talked about, maybe there's some other ones that we could recommend that we think are on the same level as the good ones here, or
Are
maybe
we are
even
we
better.
talking strictly in terms of actiony blockbusters?
I guess
No.
I'm just talking about things that were released in the summer.
Yeah.
May
Okay.
the time in the time period that Casey mentioned at the beginning, from May to Labor Day weekend.
Well, I mean, a lot of the movies that I saw this summer were, at Nippon at the Japanese Film Festival, so that doesn't
Yeah.
really count
Mm.
because those weren't films with a general release. Although
Yeah.
the animated film that I saw, Padma Inverted, did just get at least a limited release in the States because reviews of it have started popping up on the American websites like RogerEbert.com.
Right.
So Padma Inverted, I don't even know. I don't even know where it's running, if it's still running. I just happened to notice that reviews popped up a few weeks ago. If anyone gets the chance to check out Padma Inverted, very creative, very inventive animated film about a world where basically part of humanity is sequestered underground and apparently is affected by reverse gravity. So if they go up into normal ground, to above ground, they start floating up into the sky. I think when I reviewed it, I gave the film a 4 out of 4 just for the sheer brilliance of the animation and how inventive they get with playing off of the idea of anti-gravity, which makes for some really fantastic twists in the story. So yeah, if you happen to see Padma Inverted showing, a Japanese anime film that's not from Studio Ghibli, from a different studio, very different animated film. If a bit, story is not the greatest, but the animation is very good.
Justin, you sound like you had some that you wanted to put on the list.
Yeah, I won't go into too much detail here, but ones that I think our listeners may have seen or may have overlooked, possibly, because they did get kind of lost in the bluster of the typical blockbuster. The first one I want to recommend is a film called Calvary. That's
Calvary.
a
I haven't
film.
heard that one.
Yeah,
I am planning to see that. I cannot wait to see that.
yeah, it's really good. It stars Brendan Gleeson as a priest, and the premise of the film, it's also, I should say, it's written and directed by John Michael McDonough, who is the older brother of Martin McDonough,
Mhm.
Whoa. Who is your favorite
and
playwright? Just so our audience
who is
knows.
my favorite playwright and is also responsible for my favorite movie of all time, In
My second
Bruges.
favorite.
Yes, and you had Noah's second favorite.
Moulin Rouge,
um,
that's mine too.
Fuck off,
but
Casey.
yeah,
Fuck off,
the
my boy.
premise the premise of Calvary is this priest, played by Brendan Gleeson, is approached by one of his parishioners during confessional, who tells Brendan Gleeson's character he's going to kill him in a week, and it's sort of from there it kind of plays
Interesting.
out that week, and it's really fascinating. I really wish the people who went to see that that earlier movie, the movie from earlier this year, Son of God. I wish the people who saw that movie were going to this movie, because this movie actually wrestles with religious questions and doesn't just confirm, what we already believe. It really
Oh,
is.
that's right. Son of God came out this year.
Yeah.
It
So
grossed $3 million
I don't.
in its lifetime, Calvary. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's see. The
So
budget.
no, and that's really unfortunate. But I just want to point out, if you really are looking for a film that wrestles with faith but doesn't attempt to preach or pander, this is a really good film for that.
Hey, Chris
The
O'Dowd's
other
in it.
ones, yes, and Chris O'Dowd's in it. Yep,
That's always
he
fun.
plays and he has a pretty big part in that.
Cool.
Also, Aidan Gillen has a part in it.
Really? Is that
Yeah.
Littlefinger?
I don't know. He's in Game of Thrones. I know.
Yeah,
that.
I think that's
I don't really know
Littlefinger.
what character he plays, but yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that movie. I want to give a special shout out to the film that should have been a blockbuster, but alas, due to
Terrible
these
marketing.
weird kind of studio politics, basically, did not really get like a wide release, or if it did, not for very long. It's a film called Snowpiercer, stars Chris Evans.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. I'm still trying
this
to
is
find it.
this is a must see for this year. It's really wacky, but in the best kind of way. It's got a great international cast in it. There's people who turn
John
up in
Hurt.
it, you never expect to be in it. I mean, John Hurt, yeah, like that's, but like Octavia Spencer is in it, Alison Hill is in it. It's just got a really interesting cast and really interesting
Yeah.
ideas. So I want to point that one out. I want to
That one
point
did
out the
really well internationally though. That one made $82 million internationally for
yeah.
about
It's
86 worldwide.
Yeah,
yeah.
no, that's true. That's true.
Right. This is one I guess I want to point out. This is one I'd recommend for
Yeah,
domestic
definitely.
audience. It's a little more challenging than your typical blockbuster, but in the best kind of way.
We could always
Um,
go for a little challenge.
yeah. Speaking of challenges, one of my favorites from this summer also was a movie called The Rover, which stars
Mm.
Guy Pearce and Robert Pattinson in maybe his best work to date.
Hmm.
It's this kind of near future dystopian kind of film. Sort of, it's similar in its premise maybe to something like Mad Max, but in its execution is a very different kind of film. It's almost
Yeah.
like if Mad Max was an art film. I really liked it. It's interesting because I'd been anticipating it for a while. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I really liked this director a lot. His previous film was Animal Kingdom, which I loved, and I really got to say, like, even though it maybe didn't reach my high expectations, I still really liked it. I think it says some really interesting things about, what we do in a world where it doesn't seem like people give a damn anymore. It's definitely not your typical summer movie. I'm kind of surprised they released it during the summer, but I would recommend it for people who
Just
like kind of slow burn kind of films.
looking at the numbers, it's really unfortunate actually how this one turned out.
Yeah,
It cost 12 million to make. That was the production budget, and it only
yeah,
grossed 1 million worldwide. That's an 11 million
Yeah.
loss.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I don't think
Um,
that counts marketing either. Although maybe that's why it
Having
didn't do so
seen the
well. 'Cause it
film, I'm
didn't
not
market.
entirely surprised.
Uh-huh.
It's just not going to appeal to a lot of people,
Yeah.
Yeah.
unfortunately, for what
Um,
that's worth. Um,
yeah.
the last one, I'll be very brief on this one. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Um,
Go ahead.
the last one, which is currently my favorite film of the year, though that could change, I don't know, is a film called Boyhood, which I would highly recommend both to our listeners and also to you guys.
It
It's
is high up
filmed
on my
by
list.
Richard Linklater, who wrote and directed it. He also wrote and directed a film we're going to be looking at in our animation marathon, Waking Life.
Yeah.
So, and it's a really, he follows this kid for 12 years, but it's all filmed very seamlessly, and it's really just like it's a film of moments and reflection, and it feels so effortless. I think that's what I love about the film. It really captures those moments that you remember as a kid, but also is very specific to this kid. He's not just a psycho. He is a very specific character, as are the people around him. His mother
Yeah.
played by Patricia Arquette, his father played by Ethan Hawke, his sister played by Lorelai Linklater. The boy is Eller Coltrane. I just think it's really well done. It's an intimate epic, I think, is the way I described it in my.
It kind of, from what I heard, it kind of sounds like one of the film's strengths that a lot of people are mentioning are very similar to how, like you said, it anchors itself by portraying a very real boy specific to his time, very much the same way that Tree of Life very much anchors itself with its depictions specifically of, rural, suburban, suburban town, 1950s America, which was also very specific, very unique, cultural period and cultural area to grow up in. And Tree of Life, for all of its broad themes, the scenes that really resonated with people the most were the scenes about boyhood in 1950s America.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people can relate to. It sounded like, from what I've heard, Boyhood is very much in that similar vein, where it has that foundation that is specific enough to make a story out of, but general enough that you can, you can compare with your own childhoods.
Right.
Some stuff.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just some stuff that I would recommend. Number one, I'm kind of surprised it didn't crack the top 10, but maybe it just wasn't marketed that well. Was Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise, which is based off of a Japanese novel and manga series, which basically took a sci-fi premise and said, okay, let's pretend it's a video game where, big Groundhog style, you can just repeatedly die and learn from your mistakes. And so Tom Cruise is. Now that I think about it, the beginning is way overtly complicated. Humanity is fighting a war against these alien or these interdimensional invaders, and we're losing, but we don't know why, because every strategy that humanity thinks up is foiled. But really, just through a sheer freak accident, Cruise manages to kill one of the king aliens and himself at the same time, so that the creature's blood actually mixes with his own. He detonates a grenade right as the creature's on top of him. And because his own blood mixes with the creature's before he actually dies, he develops the ability that the aliens have, and that is, when he dies, he skips back in time a day. So that's how the aliens have won. Whenever humanity would have won a battle, the aliens just skip back in time and it never happened. And they shift their forces to, counter the strategy. Because the battle he's in was supposed to be a huge surprise attack. But when they're going in for the attack, they get ambushed. So he finds that he has this ability now. So now he's the one skipping back in time every time he dies, which is a lot, sometimes in hilariously inept ways. He dies a lot, but slowly figures out how he can get through the battlefield, and eventually allies with another fighter called the Bitch of the Battlefield, who's actually, I think, one of the cooler female characters to be in an action movie this year, who also previously had this ability, but then lost it. But because she had the ability, she's able to realize, even though every day starts itself over, he's able to convince her very quickly that he has the same ability. So on a day-to-day basis, they start working together to develop a strategy to win the war. So it's really, it's anyone who enjoys video games, anyone who likes sci-fi, anyone who likes good action, I think could appreciate this movie because the effects are good. Tom Cruise is still a very good actor when he wants to be. I've never really had any complaints with him as an actor. And I think it's especially worthwhile seeing if you hate Tom Cruise, because like I said, he dies a lot.
And I've heard great things about the movie from critics, from videos, from a lot of sources. It did so poorly because it was marketed weirdly. I wanted to see it based on the marketing, but it didn't really appeal to, I guess, the wide audience it needed to. It is a blockbuster at heart. It definitely can contend with some of the movies on this top 10 list.
I'll be including it in my summer blockbuster report card. In
fact, it's actually being rebranded for its DVD release. They're calling it Live, Die, Repeat. And in a subtitle, Edge of Tomorrow. So they learned their lesson, and they're gonna fix it. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a sci-fi version of Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
And two other movies that I would highly recommend, which are actually documentaries, but I was able to get neither of them are getting a release here, but I was able to find both of them online, and I really enjoyed them both. And I grouped them together because they're both about the lives of men that I personally find very inspiring and very encouraging, and I know that a lot of other people do too. To Be Takei, about George Takei, and it's a mixture of his life now with his husband Brad, and talking about what he does now, in terms of promoting gay and lesbian rights.
And Facebook.
But they also talk a lot about. They do a little bit about Star Trek, but it's not about Star Trek. They touch on Star Trek, but they also touch on his political career, and especially on his childhood experiences in an internment camp for Japanese Americans in World War II. Because a lot of most of his earliest childhood memories were of the internment camps. They talk a lot about the musical, which is getting a Broadway release next year, called Allegiance, that he and his husband co-wrote with a composer and a producer in New York City, and it's a musical about a family interned in the camps, and based off of his experiences. So it's really it's. I think a lot of people would look at it and say, "Oh, it'll just be about Star Trek." It's really not. They barely touch on Star Trek. except to do a little bit of William Shatner bashing, um, which
Always
is
a good
always cool.
selling point.
Oh no, yeah, they showed some clips from the roast that Comedy Central did with George Takei, like letting like have going at it after William Shatner at the roast, and then it cuts to him later saying, "I wasn't really acting that night. I didn't prepare anything. Like I just said what I wanted to say for 30 years."
Wow.
Um, but yeah, so it's anyone who wants to get a very detailed or very, I would say a very round view of really a guy who's very fascinating and very interesting and very active. Like he's in his I think he's in his 70s now, but he goes for long hikes every day. He's traveling constantly to cons and conventions, for Star Trek stuff. He makes guest appearances. He's incredibly active on Facebook and Twitter. He has all the work he does with LGBT rights. So he's really a very fascinating individual, and I like how they. It's not a perfect documentary. Like I wish they'd have delved more into like his relationships with his family, but it's still a very interesting look at the guy. And then the next movie, which again is in a very similar vein, is Life Itself, which is the documentary film on the life of critic Roger Ebert,
Ah.
which was supposed to be a film version of Roger Ebert's autobiography, also called Life Itself, which he wrote about a few years before he died. It was supposed to just be a film version of that with sort of update versions on what his current condition was, but then he died halfway through the production. So they kind of had to switch gears and make it a documentary about his entire life, because obviously he was dead now. So they had to address that at the end of the movie. And it's also, Roger Ebert is also, a guy, very fascinating history, really working up through the old school newspaper industry, and then getting into film criticism that way, and going into his writing abilities, his intellect, but also his personality issues, his collaboration with Gene Siskel on, their very famous TV show that ran for several decades, but also dealing with issues like his alcoholism. Gene's wife said that she was 8 months pregnant once, and Robert got in a taxi before she did. So, a lot of people, his old friends, talking about, yeah, Roger was a nice guy, but he wasn't that nice. Also a very detailed and a very nuanced portrait of another very fascinating figure within the world of film, and a hugely influential one in terms of film criticism. I mean, he, as film reviewers, we're really living in the industry that he and Gene Siskel, I can't say single-handedly because there was two of them, but like double-handedly basically remade. Whether or not they intended to, they weren't really trying to, but that's what's ended up happening. The world of film criticism is very much the world deeply, deeply impacted by what Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel did. And one of them points out, Roger Ebert wrote reviews every single week for like 45 years, which is almost half the amount of time that there have been major feature studio films. So his body of work is literally unparalleled, in the world of film criticism. But yeah, anyone who's interested in the history of film criticism in general, and specifically, the personal life of a really fascinating figure within the world of film criticism, it's absolutely a must-see. Hard to watch at times. There's some footage of his throat being cleared at the hospital after he lost most of his jaw, and he is obviously in excruciating pain.
Yeah, really.
So especially anyone who's had personal experience, taking care of a friend or a relative in a situation like that, will be hit very hard by it. But in a good way, I feel. It's because it shows it doesn't shy away from showing the how very difficult his life was for him and for his wife Shaz at the very end.
He also gave a pretty good TED talk pretty soon before he went. I remember he talked about that. So if you're interested in him, check out his TED talk.
The TED talk is good, and if you want to hear a more general perspective on his life from all the people he worked with, and just a really interesting documentary film, Life Itself and To Be Decay. Really, I think they both stand a chance of either hitting my top 10 list for this year in terms of my favorite films, or getting onto honorable mentions, because I really, really enjoyed both of them.
All right. Well, you'll have to send us that list when you've completed it.
Well, that'll be at the end of this year.
Yes. Anyway, are we all done here? Shall we wrap this up? We've been going a long time.
Yeah.
That is true. But our fans love it when we go long.
All night long.
All night long.
All right. Thank you, fans. We are the Cinema Joes. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing next. But I know in a couple months we're going to be doing, just like we did with the superheroes in the summer, we're going to be doing with animated films. So that'll be interesting to see. There's a lot more depth and nuances in the animated films that we've chosen than there were in the superhero movies, unfortunately. But so I think that'll be interesting.
Yep, coming soon.
Coming soon. Check back soon. Subscribe while you're here. And
yes,
we love
share
you all.
With your friends.